Hello and welcome to the Child Care Business Coach podcast. My name is Evelyn Knight. Thank you so much for joining us today and taking the time out of your day to listen to me talk once again. Today, I am partnered with Jeremy Lott, who I've worked with a lot in the past. And so he has some great information on finances for you. So Jeremy, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Jeremy Lott with Foundation Accounting and Consulting. And mainly I am a cash flow consultant. And I think we're going to talk a little bit today about what all that means and how all that works.
Yes, absolutely. Jeremy has worked a lot with me at my childcare center in the past, and he has helped me to understand what a cost analysis is and why it's important. For us in childcare, Jeremy, you know that us childcare people, you've worked with a few of us before, we are not business people. We don't usually know this stuff. And, sometimes I think I need to go get an MBA, but instead it's better for me just to hire people like you to come in and help me out. Right.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about first, what is a cost analysis and why is it important for owners to know this?
Cost analysis. Well, first, I think I'd start with the definition. I would separate costs and expenses. So costs, I would call anything that goes into actually doing the work. It's a lot easier with a more tangible business, kind of like a construction company. If you look at it that way, they have a truck that goes to the work site every day. And on that truck, they're going to put their employees and they're going to put their materials. And those things are things that are going to go into the job that stay there. And so we can look at the childcare industry as each child's backpack.
Okay.
So what
or
all
the
are
art
we
supplies they use that, like
right.
when we, okay.
Right. Yeah. So what all goes into that child's backpack each day before they go home?
Okay, that's an easy way to think about it. That one's always hard for me because I'm just kind of like, well, the furniture is used by them, but it doesn't go home with them. So that's a really good way to think about that.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Some of these things, though, are intangible, things that we don't really think about when we're thinking about what all goes into their backpack each day. So we
Right.
have the art supplies, but then also for the business owners, they have their insurance, they have their rent because they got to have the space, they have their telephone. A lot of people have security systems or something like that all goes into their backpack each day.
Right.
So these are things that we've got to account for too. In the accounting world, we refer to these things as direct materials that are like the art supplies and the labor of the teachers that all go into their backpacks. And then indirect are the things that you only have because you are having students come in each day.
Right. Okay. So things that licensing requires us to have would be another example of that. Just anything the things we have to operate the business.
Correct. Exactly.
Okay. That makes sense. Okay. And so why is it so important for us to understand and know what our costs are?
Well, it's important to understand what your costs are separate from your expenses because you need to be charging so that you can cover all of your costs. You have to cover the costs that go into those backpacks each day.
Right. Right, which is why we do cost analysis to begin with, right? So we can know what should we be charging, and is it in line with what we actually are charging?
Right. Yeah, exactly. So if you were to take a profit and loss and print it out, and then go down that profit and loss with a highlighter, you could highlight all of the different items that would go in that kid's backpack that are required for you to be able to provide services for those kids each day.
Right. So everything we have to do. Well, I think that's also good for us to know because when we have to cut fat, we can also look at, okay, what isn't required? We could, what is a luxury
Right.
basically? And those
Right.
are the things when COVID first hit and all of us were terrified. We didn't know what was going to happen. I know, my story where we were averaging 115 children. I literally had 115 children on a Friday. And gosh, and it's been a year, I think,
Yeah.
this week, or next week. Yeah, no, this week. It's been a year this week because it
Yeah.
was the day before my son's 16th birthday. And
Oh,
my poor boy, yeah. So he turned 16 right and was supposed to get his license like right when COVID hit. But anyway, I had 115 children on a Friday, and that following Monday, I was down to 27. And
holy cow.
yeah, so that was terrifying, right? And we all went through this where it was just like, oh my gosh, what do I do? And my first thought was, I've got to cut. And so exactly that was where what you have taught me about like the cost analysis and whatnot was so important to me, because I knew, okay, if it's not part of those costs that I have to have in order to operate, it's got to go. And I knew I could cut out any, excessive items at that point.
Right. Yeah, and that's a great practice to be able to do, is to go down through your profit and loss and be able to figure out what things are essential for providing services for the children and what services are essential for keeping the business side of things up and running.
Right, right. So now let's talk a little bit about one of the exercises you've done with me, which was really, really helpful and probably a huge eye opener for me. Is you helped me figure out how much I need to charge per child to break even, right? And you also helped me figure that out by age and classroom. So talk to me a little bit about that. And I get give us a bird's eye view. I know it's a very detailed process, but a bird's eye view of the process and why is that important?
Yeah, no problem. So we look at the cost analysis after we've gone through the profit and loss and marked everything in yellow that should be included as costs. We take all of those costs and we throw them in a great big bucket. And then we have to figure out how much of that bucket to pour into each backpack each day.
Right.
And so that's what we're going to do, is we're going to figure out a way to be able to do that. And the word for that is allocate. We need to allocate those costs to each child.
Right.
So typically the system that I use, and as you said, it can get a little bit complicated, but the system that I use is we figure out, okay, how many children are in each classroom, and how many teachers are in each classroom, and how many total hours are the teachers putting in to the children. And that kind of gets us started. And then we can look at how much each of those teachers costs per hour. And that'll give us a total cost for the wages for that room, say for a day.
Right.
Once we have that, then we can look at dividing the total bucket that we had with all those costs. We divide that total bucket by the total hours in the different classrooms. And that tells us how much to pour into each classroom.
Right. And that was so helpful for me because before I was just basically taking my overhead, dividing it by how many children were in attendance each day. And that to me, I thought was my break even. And I didn't really take into account the fact that my infant room is a 1-to-4 ratio. And even though it's big enough to be licensed for 21, I only take 8 infants in that room. So I didn't realize at the time that, okay, I have to analyze them a lot differently. And I mean, I knew logically, of course, I need to charge more for them, but I didn't realize how detailed we had to get until you really showed me, that we've got to look at my rent expenses and divide based on those children. We have to look at, so when we did that deep dive into all that, it really helped me to understand, wow, I need to charge like $50 a week more for my infants than I do my preschoolers, just because not only the cost of the teachers, but the cost of the supplies they're using, the cost of the square footage they're taking up, the insurance, so yeah, I mean, before I think I was doing a bird's eye view, but I never realized until you did that process with me how detailed we really, really need to get when it
Yeah.
comes to a cost analysis.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the things I find too in early childhood education is a lot of times across the board, you'll find a lot of centers don't even take infants and toddlers because they're just not, we just can't charge enough in order for us to turn that profit. And I know like a lot of times they're just breaking even, and then you're basically just making the money within your preschool and your pre-K programs. But it's important for us to know that. It's important, as an owner, for me to know that, okay, I am just breaking even on, which is what we ended up finding out. My infant room is just breaking even, which is okay. I was okay with that. But then it also helps me to figure out, okay, that means if this classroom and I'm making a profit, after a certain dollar amount in this classroom, then I really need to watch what I'm charging by every age and part-time, and like how much I charge becomes so much more important in that area.
Yeah, and I'm probably the only accountant that will ever tell you that the money isn't the only thing that matters in that scenario, because a lot of the time they will get new students. The different centers, from my experience, will get new students that are infants. And yeah, they cost them money for a while, but those infants are going to then move up to the next class,
Right.
and the next class and the next class. And so it can be viewed as kind of a marketing cost.
Yep. Absolutely. And that's a great point. One of the things I coach my clients on is also that we have to remember that parents have more than one child too. So even though that infant starts with us now, a lot of my families have been with me for 10 years because they started with me when their first child was an infant, and now they're 3 children later, 10 years later, they're still with me. So that's another great point that I point out to my clients. Like, yes, you're probably just breaking even. Maybe, I think when I first started, the first time you did my cost analysis, I was actually at a negative $6 per head, which isn't bad. I mean, I was losing $6 per infant in my childcare center, which wasn't bad, but I definitely raised my prices to make sure I broke even. But at the same time, I don't know how many owners would just automatically look at it like, oh, I'm losing money. That's a waste of space. I might as well fill this with the square footage, where I'm making money. But I totally agree with you. We have to see the bigger picture. Not only is that great advertising, but it's also great for that we're basically keeping future customers and referral marketing too. I did a podcast episode on referral marketing a couple of weeks ago, and that's another reason, why Zooin, my center, has such a huge wait list, because referral marketing and just the fact that I have those infants and the parents keep having babies, and I don't even have to, I fill my center, my infant room now with my existing customers at this point.
That's great. Yeah. And you bring up another great point there about the waiting list.
Mm-hmm.
I use this a lot of times to justify increasing prices. And we get a lot of pushback from the different center owners about raising prices. Well, when you get talking with them, most centers have a wait list. And if you have a wait list, then you have a little more flexibility with being able to increase prices, because if you lose a few, you have a few on the wait list that you can fill in the space.
Right. And I think that was one of our first conversations that you and I had, which really was a big mind shift for me. I remember we were talking about my center, and I was so afraid to raise my rates. And this was a few years ago when we first met. And you basically told me that I had a wait list also. And you basically told me, well, you need to decide, are you going to be Walmart or are you going to be Target or Macy's? And I remember having that like epiphany of, and you pointed that out to me, like, you have a wait list. Where else are the parents going to go? And if you have that, you explained to me like the whole supply and demand, and you were absolutely right. I think that year I raised my rates by $15 a week. And I did
Oh,
not lose. Yeah, that year that you and I had that conversation, I pulled the trigger. I hadn't raised my rates in 8 years at that time. And that's when you basically were like, this isn't, you got to do it. And so I did. It was a dramatic raise and I was scared. But I remember you telling me, well, there's how many other people waiting to take these spots,
right,
right?
right.
And that was part of where my transformation in business came through for my center. And when I went through with it, we did not lose one family. And you were absolutely right that because of the supply and demand, the parents that were enrolled in my center were so scared to lose their spot, but they stayed. And I only got like 2 or 3 complaints. I mean, when you do a drastic change like that, you're going to get
Yeah,
complaints.
yeah.
And so I did. I got a couple complaints. We were ready for it. But one mom actually said to me, I don't like it, but what am I going to do? Nothing I can do about it. So I was
Hmm.
just like, oh, okay, well, great.
Yeah,
So it does. I mean, you're absolutely right. We do in our industry, we get scared. And a lot of that is our lack of business knowledge. And also, I think it's where we need to break free of industry norms and really start looking at our industry as a business because it is a business, and so yeah, so you definitely helped me a lot with that. And now every year when I do my annual increases to keep up with inflation, I don't second guess myself at all because of when you taught me that lesson where it's like, I believe in the product I have. So I don't want to be Walmart. I want to be Macy's.
that's great.
So what else about like cost analysis is
Uh-huh.
like why is it so important? I mean, we've talked a little bit about we have to know where our break even and in order to make sure that we have a healthy business to turn a profit. But is there anything I'm missing on why it's so important to know all of this?
Well, it's important for pricing, as we've already discussed. And it's also important so that you know how to best incentivize your employees.
Right.
If you know what your costs are and you know how much you're charging, then you can understand better what kind of flexibility you have to be able to hire better talent, to be able to incentivize the people that are working for you so that you can keep them motivated and keep them loving what they're doing.
That is actually a really, really good point also in that, like for me, going back to the Macy's analogy, my center superpower is our high quality standards, right? We are a 4-star. We're the only 4-star center in 3 counties actually that surround us. And in order to have a 4-star center, I have to price myself accordingly because it does take a little bit more to achieve that. And I
Hmm.
think a lot of owners get so scared of how much it costs to be a high quality center that they don't try. And but you're absolutely right. When you put all of this together and understand your value, your worth, you shed that fear of raising your rates. Also understand what is it going to cost me to achieve this goal of being a high, quality center. It really helps you to understand where your pricing needs to be.
Right, right. And I think, I've heard before you talk a little bit about the difference between a daycare and a
Mhm.
child care center.
Yes.
Daycare is a bad word.
Yes.
And that's because the child care centers are places that you can go to find that kind of quality.
Right. Yes. And oh, yeah, absolutely. I train my staff they are not allowed to call my center a daycare. I've worked very hard to make sure that
Right.
that place is a preschool. And I know for like childcare, but my staff doesn't even call it childcare. They call it a preschool.
Oh,
Now, parents, the outside world, we refer to it as childcare. That's fine. But I actually get offended because to me, and so I do want to qualify though, for those listeners out there, if you choose to have a daycare, that is your choice. That is your, feel free to make that choice. But for me, I chose not to. My place of business is not just a babysitting place. It is a place where children learn, grow, and are nurtured. And so when you put that learning aspect into it, it goes from being a babysitter to a childcare center and to a preschool. So I think it's important. And I absolutely agree. And that's again where we decide, right? Are we going to be Walmart, Target, or Macy's? You've got those three different levels of quality, which I see as daycare, childcare, preschool. So it's the same kind of concept where we make that decision. And if you choose to be daycare, that's totally fine. That is your business model.
Right.
That's fine. That's what you've chosen. But I think we have to own it, right? And
Yeah.
that's where you're going to
Yeah.
price yourself. You've got to price yourself based on what do you want to do? Do you want to just care for kids and not really run a quality curriculum? That's fine. That is that's fine. So it is really just personal preference at that point.
Well, and it also comes down to volume too.
Exactly.
If you look at the Walmarts of the world, it's wonderful to have the Walmart, but there has to be a lot of them, and they have to be moving a lot more product than Macy's does, because they're only making, say, 10 cents per item, where Macy's is making $1 per item.
Right. And that's a great point too. And like my infant room, when I first took over my Zoo and Around center, we had 21 babies in there in my infant room. Yeah, we had 21. I worked actually in an infant room that had 24 babies for 3 years. It was crazy.
Oh, wow.
So, but my infant room did have 21 babies. And I just remember walking in there day after day and I hated it. I just hated the quality we were putting out for those babies. It just wasn't me. And my prices were a lot lower at that point, and I had the volume, and I was turning a bit of a profit in that room because of the amount of babies, but I wanted to be Macy's. So I dropped our numbers from 21 to 8, which is significant. Mm-hmm. But in that room, I think in my infant room, I ended up increasing my prices by about $35 a week. I mean, that's huge.
Wow.
But going from 21 to 8, the parents were more than happy to pay for it because it really it was a game changer for our quality. So yeah, you're absolutely right. The volume. So if you're happy with your volume, if you're fine with having, a room with 20 babies, then that's fine. That is your business model. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I'm a huge believer in, if that's what you want, don't let people shame you into different, but right. You have to know who you are and what you want to put out into the world. And for me, I couldn't put that out into the world.
Yeah. And a lot of it comes down to resources available, right? Mm-hmm. Because if you're an in-home daycare, your volume is going to be limited.
Yes, absolutely.
So you have to be more a Macy's type model in order to make money.
Right. And a lot of in-homes though they do have the opportunity to put out really, really high quality. Mm-hmm. And so I absolutely agree on that one, where they should be charging more. And it's kind of sad because a lot of times in the in-home space, they're charging less.
Right.
Because they feel like they're not center space. But I don't know, the way I look at it, a lot of times a lot of the in-homes are more capable of putting out a lot higher quality than we are in a center. So, you've got close relationships with your families. You have much lower ratio, and group size ratio might be a little bit higher, but your group size is lower. So I totally agree. Those in-home providers out there, don't sell yourself short. Charge what you are worth. You are worth so much more a lot of times than what a center is worth.
Yeah, you had a great post last week that I shared on my site as well about charging what you're worth. And
yep,
that was fantastic.
Well, money mindset is something I'm really working on with my audience right now. I just did a Facebook episode on my Facebook page on it, because in our industry, people tend to see money as an evil thing. And so I'm really trying to change people's mindset and get them to understand that money inherently by itself isn't bad. It's what we do with money. It's the choices we make. Uh-huh. And there's so many fallacies around money. Like, when you hear things like money is the root of all evil, things like that, where we put these negative connotations on money, but really money, it's not money. And I don't know if my background is in neurological psychology. So one of the things I also have heard that I really like is money doesn't change people. Money just enhances who you are. So, talking about this cost analysis, raising your prices, putting out the quality, that also all goes into that money mindset. If you have a negative relationship with money, if you feel greedy because you're charging, or as an owner because you're turning a profit, really need to change your money mindset. You really need to see what your relationship with money is. Really look at how you view it and question why. Why do you feel like it's bad to turn a profit? That's what we all
Right.
in childcare. If you owned a shoe store, you'd expect to turn a profit. But in this industry, for some reason, we are expected, we're seen as greedy when we do. So
Right.
we really need, and for me, I guess I view money as it really empowers me to fulfill my purpose in the world. And with the profits I turn, I can do more for more
Right.
people. It just enhances who I am. It doesn't change who I am.
Yeah. Well, so many of your listeners and your clients see what they do as a noble calling.
Mm-hmm.
And I
It is.
agree 100%, but you have to put food on the table too
Yes.
in the process of providing your noble services to the world.
Right. Well, and think about somebody like Oprah Winfrey. Most people would say that she's a very noble, good person, right? But
Mhm.
she's also, I don't remember if she's still the richest, but I know at one point she was the richest woman in the world. So just
Right.
think about that. She made billions through her nobility and by bringing what she felt was good to the world. So when you have these false narratives in your mind about money, yet we see someone like her and put her on a pedestal who's made multi-billions, you got to realize it's okay for you to make money too. It is
Right.
okay for you to gain wealth by doing what is best, as long as it's those intentions that you put out into the world that really matter. So I know I
Yeah.
just got off on a tangent, but it's an important tangent.
Well, and I would almost take it one step further and say that not only is your noble calling in childcare or in preschool, taking care of the education of young minds, but it's also in acquiring wealth, because
Yes.
the wealth needs to be in the hands of noble people that are willing to help out other people and do fantastic, amazing things with money.
Exactly. The philanthropy work we can do, right? I could not agree with you more. It's so yeah, for those of my listeners out there, if you really struggle with turning a profit, making money, and acquiring wealth through childcare, just really think of who you are at the core and realize, what can you do with that money? How much more can you give back to your center? How much more can you give to your family, right? How much can you do? And the person, like for me, I was able to start this podcast. I'm able to start my second business who helps owners basically save their business from bankruptcy and just from failure, right? So, am I making money off of it? Yes, I am. But I'm also bringing a lot of good and positivity to the world, because it fuels the time that I would have to be clocking in and clocking out somewhere. Now,
Right.
instead, I can be giving back.
Right. Yeah.
Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for coming on with me today. I so appreciate your time. So if
You bet.
my listeners want to find you, where can they go to find you?
So they can find me on my website at foundationacs.com. They can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/foundation accounting consulting. And they can find my show, the People in Your Neighborhood show, where we highlight people like yourself or other business owners and let them talk about their story and how they have come up with their own unique solutions. They can find that on Facebook at facebook.com/the people in your neighborhood.
Perfect. And I will link all of that into our show notes. So if anybody wants to look up Jeremy's show or find his website, there will be a link in the show notes for you to click on. And you also have a YouTube channel, don't you?
Yes, I do.
Okay, cool. I'll link that too. I know I have a YouTube channel now too. So I will probably put this in there, and so we can both kind of share back and forth on our YouTube channels. But I'll put all of those links in the show notes for any of my listeners who want to get a hold of you or who want to watch your People in the Neighborhood show. It is great. I love it. So I highly recommend it for you guys. Join Jeremy's group. It's another just wonderful resource with a lot of information for you. So thank you once again, Jeremy, for joining me.
You bet. Thank you.